So the first episode of 2021 of the Heel to the Face podcast is on the air. And Brandon, can you believe it's been 15 years to this date? We're currently recording on January the 8th. That Edge was the very first person to cash in his Money in the Bank against John Cena after the Elimination Chamber at the now defunct, only in 3-time appearance, New Year's Revolution pay-per-view from WWE. I was at that event, the second pay-per-view I ever attended. First Monday Night Raw pay-per-view back when that mattered. I guess maybe it still does. But, Brandon, what do you remember from New Year's Revolution 2006?
That's it. That's it. And here's the thing. Here's the crazy part. 15 years ago was 2006. Man, we're...
Yes, I know. It makes it seem even older because it happened literally just 8 days into the new year. So, yes, 2006 seems like 14 years ago, but unfortunately we are officially in 2021. We got that and much more to talk about, including another big pay-per-view event that kicks off right at the turn of the calendar. That and much more as the Heel to Face podcast starts right now.
So silence your cell phones, hold your applause, and tune into the truth.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody.
Getting beat up by 9 guys in Syracuse, to me, there's not a whole lot of shame in.
From the 315 to the world, this is the Heel to Face podcast.
The cream of the crop! Wow, man, freaked out!
Follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Heel to the Face.
I said, are you ready?
From Armory Square in downtown Syracuse, New York, let's send it now to Brandon and Jared.
Bad luck seems to be my middle name. They might as well tag me up with my buddies from Syracuse.
So another edition of the Heel to the Face podcast, the very first one of the new year. Brandon Clements, Jared Wicks. Make sure to follow the program at Heel to the Face on Twitter. Subscribe and get notified of all our shows via our podcast formats or via on YouTube. And we'll start right here because it was where we ended our show in 2020. We haven't been on the air since. And I know it's really hard to see. I'll kind of step back for the YouTube audience, but I am wearing a Bludgeon Brothers t-shirt. Brodie Lee, a man who, in the world of professional wrestling, I'll say he was very underutilized, but definitely in Central New York, somebody who was probably one of the bigger deals in Central New York when it comes to professional wrestling because he was from the Rochester, New York area. He made his name for himself, probably wrestled more in Syracuse, New York, in Rochester, New York, in Utica, New York, than he probably did anywhere else in the country because he spent a lot more time in the Indies, NWA Upstate, Rochester City Wrestling, Empire, 2CW Wrestling, all the indies that went around the East Coast. I've seen him a ton in the indie circuit. I helped set up rings while he was right there doing the same. Brandon, whether it be indie wrestling or whether it be WWE, AEW, what is your favorite in-ring memory of Brodie Lee?
Honestly, man, it was his last match. It was his unexpected swan song, so to speak, where he had the dog collar match with Cody Rhodes at AEW where he dropped the TNT title. He's had a lot of great matches over the years. I mean, there was a match, forget what pay-per-view it was, but off the top of my head, it was Randy Orton and him as Luke Harper in WWE. There was also a Dolph Ziggler match at another show that was pretty good. He's done some stuff with Cesaro back on the indie circuit that were pretty good, which Cesaro was under a different name. But here's the thing. It was so unexpected. And I remember when you texted me after it was like we recorded our show, we had it up and everything, and like 8 hours later we find out, and you texted me and said, "Hey, Brodie's gone." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, no freaking way. 41 years young, man. He's got, he leaves a wife and 2 young kids. Brodie Jr. is going to be a future star in AEW, already doing big things. But he was well liked by everybody. I mean, I didn't get a chance to rub elbows with him like you did briefly when he was in the indie circuit. Never got a chance to meet him, but from everybody that I've talked to that, in the area, I know a lot of people that are big 2CW fans as well that have got to meet or got to know Luke Harper or Brodie Lee, John Huber. They said great things. He was well liked. He was just one of the boys, so to speak. He was just really chill. He would always be there to help people. So it's a tough loss, especially being 41. He's got young kids, wife. He's got this. He had so many years of wrestling, good wrestling, really good wrestling ahead of him. He was just scratching the surface of how good he really was. and it was very unfortunate how things, panned out. Somebody we all thought, professional wrestler, professional athlete, great shape, and, he passes away, with the lung ailment. That I did not expect that at all. I know he's going to be missed by a lot of people. And I will say this, AEW did a rocking job on it. I know it was last week, but they did a great job. I thought the tribute was absolutely fantastic. I do like the fact that Brodie Jr. is now under contract, so when he turns 18, he'll be officially a member of the AEW roster. I mean, he's already part of the family forever anyways. So kudos to Tony Khan and company. Great job. Brodie Lee, John Huber, Luke Harper. He will be missed.
Yeah, I have to say it's crazy because it didn't seem like he was in WWE that long, and obviously for the most part he wasn't in the main event. So I was actually very surprised. I mean, I didn't know him obviously that well in personal life, and I definitely didn't know him at all when in WWE life and backstage. But it was crazy, I guess, to think about how many people he knew and how much he really meant to the people backstage, because you wouldn't have guessed it. There's so many people in WWE, especially in his position where he's not really in the main event. He's not Randy Orton. He's not John Cena. He's not one of these guys who's really one of these top star guys. I mean, if you're not somebody like us who kind of has heard about him before and knows more about him outside of WWE, you would think one of the Highlanders died, or one of the Dicks, or Eric Rowan, or one of these kind of guys who, had a kind of a rise, like a Ryback or somebody like that. But apparently he was more than just wrestling. And I think that is what got him where he got in AEW when it comes to the tributes, when it comes to the importance that his death had, because we were kind of going back and forth on this. And as a wrestler, like I said, people like Ashley Massaro died, just about a year ago. And I want to say when it comes to WWE, she's been out of it for a little while now, but she kind of felt like at the time, I mean, she was probably on more covers of WWE magazine or things at WWE than Luke Harper ever was. While he was with the Wyatt family, I mean, he was an integral player, but he was definitely not anyone who graced the cover of any programs. It was never anybody whose T-shirt, the T-shirt I'm wearing, the Bludgeon Brothers T-shirt, for the most part, I mean, outside, I think, of one obscure shirt, is like the only shirt he had as part of a tag team in WWE. In AEW, he had his own shirt. And they built him up a lot more because that's what AEW does. And AEW kind of took out of him what everyone knew about him in the independent circuit. In the independent circuit, he was a very big dude. And I'll actually say it's kind of a funny story. I never thought he would be anybody, and I thought that was because of his size. Meaning, when I started going to indie wrestling and I started helping out with ring crews, and I started to get to know the guys a little bit better, because I had a friend who would drive a few people to the indie wrestling shows that he dormed up with at Oswego University and other places. We always used to like the people like Colin Delaney, Colin Olsen at the time, who made his debut in WWE, and some of these smaller guys to be in WWE, because we never thought that anybody from any of these indie circuits would ever make it any further than a squash match. Like Colin Delaney originally did, John McChesney from indie wrestling originally did. And I thought, well, it stinks for Brodie Lee. He's so big, he'll never make it in WWE because he's too big. And we never believed that anybody from indies will actually be legitimately in WWE. We only thought the best they would do is in a squash match on Monday Night Raw. And he's too big to get squashed by Umaga or Great Khali. It's not believable. So because he's too believable to get killed by some of these guys in WWE, and because he's from Rochester, New York, and that means he'll never actually make it, because who makes it to WWE full time? So we just thought he'd always be stuck in the indies because he's too big to be a fill-in, and he's too small and too unknown to ever be a big star. And thankfully, things like NXT came around, because this is back before NXT. This is back before FCW really kicked it in the high gear. And it's because of those reasons he got to actually shine and get a chance in WWE. Because if it wasn't for those, he would have probably ended wrestling. I think at the age of 32 years old in 2012, he was hanging up his boots. He was not going to wrestle anymore on the weekends. He was working in the Rochester City School District as a book clerk / librarian. And he was about to just say, you know what, this weekend gig, enough of this. Let's just get back to full-time work. And that's when WWE called, and they had a developmental chance. And that really thankfully happened so that he would get recognition, because unfortunately he would have never got to meet some of the guys in WWE. He would have never got to make the impressions he did. And if he would have died at 41 years old, I mean, it definitely wouldn't have been anything spectacular when it comes to being well known like it is in WWE and AEW and the amazing tribute show they put on.
And to add to that too, just a final thought. I mean, folks like Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, you name the wrestler, Chris Jericho, they all said he was one of the best workers they ever were in the ring with. And when you hear people, especially Randy Orton and Chris Jericho, I did see a lot of other tributes, but I'm gonna say if Randy Orton and Chris Jericho say you're one of the best workers they've ever been in the ring with, that means you're pretty darn legit. And I am so glad that AEW, albeit a very short time in AEW, he got the push that he deserved, and he took the ball and ran with it. And that final match was a great match with Cody Rhodes and the dog collar match. Who would have thought a couple months later we'd be talking about it on our show that he's no longer with us? And again, thoughts and prayers go out to the family.
Yeah, and it really stinks that he never got to wrestle in AEW ever in front of a live crowd, other than the small ones at Bayley's Place. He was scheduled to make his debut at AEW in Rochester, and I'd imagine he was pretty pumped for that. He currently, as of the time of his passing, still lived in Webster, New York. So he's not one of these guys who, was from Rochester and moved to Florida. He did it one time, but eventually actually moved back to Rochester and flew out of Rochester on a weekly basis and lived in Webster, New York, so we go back and forth to Florida or wherever he had to go. So he's not somebody who just happened to be from here at one time and made his home in Florida. He's somebody who currently made his home in New York State. He's somebody who currently made his home in the Rochester area. So I can only imagine how excited he would have been to wrestle at the Blue Cross Arena, knowing he could just drive home afterwards. He could see it in front of his friends and family, and then go back home in front of his friends and family literally that night. I watched an interview with him recently at the Blue Cross Arena right before a SmackDown event that our friend and former partner of the show, Paul Essendon, he went with me to a SmackDown show in which Luke Harper was on the dark match before SmackDown went on the air. Got a huge reception in front of the crowd in Rochester at the Blue Cross Arena. Did an interview before the show about how excited he was to be from Rochester, how he still watches Amerks games. He goes to tons of Rochester Amerks games when he has a chance. And still loves, garbage plates and flying in and out of Rochester on a weekly basis. So it does stink that he never got that chance. That's just one of the many things that 2020 robbed us. We'll use that transition to talk to another thing that 2020 robbed us of for now. And that was a match that was supposed to happen the night before WrestleMania in Lakeland, Florida for Ring of Honor's Super Card of Honor. And that was Marty Scurll and Jay White going one-on-one. Now, the reason I bring up those two names is because those two names are on a very hot list to maybe make it to the WWE. Marty Scurll recently was released by Ring of Honor. The most recent, appearance in wrestling Marty Scurll had was he was supposed to go up against Nick Aldis in the NWA World Crockett Cup a few months ago before the pandemic hit, and it was this pay-per-view scheduled match, I think, for the NWA Championship. His future at NWA, I am unaware of at this time, but his time in Ring of Honor apparently is done. He is removed a little bit from the controversy he had about a year or two ago when his name was involved in the Speaking Out movement. But as of right now, Marty Scurll, and as of right before the pandemic hit, he was scheduled to face some pretty big talent, including Jay White, who just recently, a few days ago, wrestled at Wrestle Kingdom 15. We talked at the start of the show about how it's unbelievable that it was 15 years ago that Edge cashed in his Money in the Bank at New Year's Revolution. It was 15 years ago that Wrestle Kingdom started. This was Wrestle Kingdom 15, and it only started as a event in 2007. The January 4th New Japan show has been going on since 1992. It's only been officially known as Wrestle Kingdom since 2007. Jay White's been a part of probably the last 5 of them. He is out of New Zealand, 28 years old. He's in the prime of his career. He did lose the match to Ibushi in the championship, IWGP Intercontinental and Heavyweight Championship match after Ibushi beat Naoto on night number 1, which I felt of the 2 nights of Wrestle Kingdom was the better night because it had more of the namesakes. The second night was It was really a one-match card the second night. Sonata took on Evil, and if you know New Japan Wrestling, those are bigger names. But for the non-New Japan super fans out there, it was really just Ibushi versus Jay White for the championship, which saw Jay White lose in now what is the longest match in Tokyo Dome history when it comes to these shows. 48 minutes. It's hard to believe it was 48 minutes because I watched the match, and pretty much any New Japan main event I watch seems like it's 48 minutes, whether it be Omega and Jericho, Omega and Naoto, Ibushi and Okada. The list goes on. But Jay White said afterwards that he thinks that he's accomplished all he can in New Japan Wrestling, and it might be time for him to leave. So after that long intro of Marty Scurll, Jay White, I'm going to pose it to you, Brandon. Are you interested in seeing either of these guys in the WWE and NXT and AEW, or where do we want to see Marty Scurll and Jay White show up next?
I want to see both of them in WWE. I'd like to see them start off in NXT. That would be a good idea. I mean, I know AJ Styles made the leap right to Royal Rumble, but I think you saw what Shinsuke Nakamura did. He tore the house down in NXT. He became a household name in front of an American audience on NXT. I think that's the right move. I think for both wrestlers. And honestly, the one I really want to see the most is Switchblade, man. I think Switchblade would be – he reminds me of Seth Rollins in many ways. So I think he would be a great addition to the WWE family. And I do think Marty Scurll can, I think he also should be here. But WWE's got to be careful, especially with everything that's been going on with the the issues that have gone on in the last couple of years that that I read up about. I know you've read about. So they're both talented. I would bring them both in. But if I had to pick one, I would go Switchblade because there's no I guess maybe some potential baggage. So WWE doesn't need any more bad PR. So I think Switchblade would be the way to go.
I think with both of these guys, and I would love to see them in NXT. I don't know if I would love to see them in WWE's main shows of Raw and SmackDown because I don't really see anybody. I mean, obviously the Seth Rollins of the world, they've made it. But AJ Styles, he never even was in NXT, but he made it, from the New Japan world. It was AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura just 3 weeks prior at Wrestle Kingdom, I think 11, or Wrestle Kingdom 10, right before he made his debut at the Royal Rumble 2016. AJ Styles, Shinsuke Nakamura, an amazing match at Wrestle Kingdom. We saw it just a couple of years later at WrestleMania, not so much. Kyle O'Reilly and Adam Cole had an amazing match at Wrestle Kingdom for the Ring of Honor Championship, going on about 5 years ago now. Those guys, I'm afraid, when they make it to the main roster, is it going to get ruined? So I love both of these guys. I want to see him out of New Japan Wrestling, especially I feel Jay White. He's been there for a long period of time. It's time for him to showcase elsewhere. It is tough because New Japan Wrestling, if you look back about 5 years ago, that is a bona fide WrestleMania card. That is a card that has WWE fans happy. That is a card that has AEW fans happy. That's a card that has every wrestling fan happy because you got the Good Brothers, you got the Young Bucks, you got Finn Balor, you've got Adam Cole, you've got, even going back to 2008, you got Kurt Angle, you've got the Dudley Boys, you got the Steiner Brothers, you got Kyle O'Reilly and Bobby Fish. You have all these people, and Shinsuke Nakamura. Now you look back on those cards and you look at what you have now, and to a New Japan fan, there's probably still a lot of names, but to the American audience, I mean, we just talked about the reason I watched Wrestle Kingdom 15 was because it was about 4 years ago that Jericho decided to show up at Wrestle Kingdom, and on that card you had Jericho, you had Moxley, you had Lance Archer, you had Juice Robinson, you had a lot of people who aren't there anymore. So I guess I'm afraid for New Japan in the sense of their American audience because Jay White to me was one of the last non-Japanese wrestlers on that card. And to be honest with you, Jon Moxley, he's still going to show up there once more. He's got the IWGP US Championship. I feel that it was COVID that kept him out of this year's Wrestle Kingdom. But other than that, it was really hard to find, which at one time was probably 50-50 Japanese, 50-50 American, or 50-50 English-speaking, I guess best way to put it. And this Wrestle Kingdom was not that case. Jay White was one of the only English-speaking wrestlers on the card. So I feel really bad, and I feel bad for people like Okada and Ibushi who've been there forever, who I feel are going to go down with the ship of New Japan Wrestling because it is their lineage, it is their heritage, and they're running out of some fresh English eyes, to really watch them and care about their matches now that the Omegas and the Young Bucks and the Cody Rhodeses are in America for good. But Jay White, Marty Scurll, I love both those guys. I'd love to see him at Ring of Honor, and I love to see him. I loved Marty Scurll. His character I probably like a little better than Jay White's. Jay White, I might like his wrestling better. I'd like to see him both on NXT. That's where I'd like to see him. I don't want to see him in Impact Wrestling, to be honest with you, until Impact Wrestling turns things around and gets some crowds going and maybe builds off of what they're currently doing. I'm not saying I never want to see him in Impact Wrestling because Impact Wrestling is on the up and up. But right now, NXT is where they should go because NXT is where all those hot guys from New Japan Wrestling, like the Adam Coles, Finn Balor, Damian Priest, a lot of those guys who spent time in Japan, they are in NXT. And to be honest with you, I think it's time for some of those NXT guys to maybe get the call up, and it'd be perfect for the replenishment of NXT with Jay White and Marty Scurll. If you finally get people like Gargano or Adam Cole a chance on the main roster, because it's crazy to think, but we're going back about 3 years since Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano, Aleister Black, they all showed up on the main roster that one night, and we thought, oh, they're here for good. And now it's been about 3 years since then. It's crazy to think. And they've been down there, and Finn Balor has actually gone backwards and gone down there, and Ember Moon has gone down there. And now rumors have it that Rhea Ripley, her time in NXT is done. She's going to make it up to the main roster. The big thing is NXT and WWE are two different programs. And I want to find a way. I don't know how WWE needs to do it, but WWE needs to find a way to be NXT with bigger names.
I agree with you 100%. And just to put a bow on Marty Scurll and Slingblade or Switchblade, excuse me, they both are, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Marty Scurll's, I think he's in his early 30s, and I want to see Jay White in his late 20s. So these guys are still both relatively young in the wrestling business. So having them come here now would be perfect, instead of them waiting till they're almost 40 to come here like AJ Styles did, because AJ Styles, he was a known commodity for a long time, and he ended up making the jump, later on in his career. So I think it's perfect for Marty and Jay to bring their talents over across to America, and I think NXT would be perfect for them. And here's the thing, Daniel Bryan, I did read a lot of reports that Daniel Bryan is not wrestling as much. He's a creative mind backstage. For the main roster, and from what I've been reading, reports are that he is pushing hard to get NXT superstars up. He even admitted, in an interview that I saw, that the fans want to see fresh talent up. They want to see fresh rivalries up. They want to see fresh. And Daniel Bryan knows. I mean, shoot. If it wasn't for the Yes movement, we wouldn't have had him be champion, So that's what he's pushing for, because some of these underutilized talents need to get used. Or here's the thing. They're going to go to AEW. They're going to go to New Japan. They're going to go to Impact, because wrestling is just getting so much better. And speaking of Impact, let's talk about Bullet Club, huh? Let's go there. I mean, AEW this week, that was the show. NXT was pretty good. But AEW this week was absolutely fantastic. New Year's Smash, and I'm gonna let you talk about it a little bit more, because it's so good to see a little reunion on Dynamite or New Year's Bash this week, or New Year's Smash.
I personally liked New Year's Evil this week a little bit better. Felt like another one of the NXT little pay-per-views. I thought Rhea Ripley and Raquel Gonzalez tore the house down. Literally, they went backstage and. The last one, the standing match, that was definitely pay-per-view quality. New Year's Bash for AEW, I feel it had some moments. I think, obviously, the big moment was there at the end that Impact Wrestling is finally getting some love on AEW instead of the way it's been in reverse. All building up to that big six-man tag that they're going to have at the next official Impact Wrestling pay-per-view, Hard to Kill, they have like a special this week, Genesis, which at one time was a TNA Impact Wrestling pay-per-view event. They still have the brand name, so they're doing like NXT style and making it a special this Saturday night. But the next official pay-per-view, Hard to Kill, in 2 weeks, is going to have a 6-man tag. And my one complaint, I guess, that I have from the Good Brothers reuniting with the Bullet Club and the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega on Impact Wrestling, or on AEW Wrestling from Impact, was, I think, the name that really needs to get some time on AEW right now, if you're hyping him up, is Rich Swann. Rich Swann is the Impact champion. This whole 6-man tag at Hard to Kill is supposed to be champion versus champion. Omega versus Swann, team versus team. The problem is Rich Swann, and kind of not deservedly so, but understandably so, is not getting the same love as Kenny Omega. He is not Kenny Omega, and he needs the push. I feel like he definitely should have showed up on AEW, and maybe next week needs to show up on AEW, because I feel a good example is here. I mean, the part team of Kenny Omega is more recognizable and getting more of a pop than the heavyweight champion of Impact Wrestling. I understand where Impact Wrestling is. It needs this help. It needs AEW to push it along because of the fact that, it doesn't have the notoriety. It got about 148,000 views this week, which, to be all honest with you, I know people on YouTube who are nowhere near as famous as a lot of these people and still get way more views on their YouTube. I'm not even talking the main YouTube stars that get 50 million views. I'm talking just some of these other wrestling podcast shows that get 190,000 views every week, or a couple 100,000 views. And Impact Wrestling's TV show got 148,000 watches this past week. So they definitely, if they want to look like they're on even playing field, if they want to look like this is a fair invasion angle, Impact and AEW going head to head, Impact Wrestling needs to look a lot better, and they need to put Rich Swann on AEW TV. They need to hype him up, make him seem like a much more, intimidating force than he is. This can't just be all about AEW showing up on Impact Wrestling. This just can't be, hey, like it's, to me, it's like an independent wrestling show where it's a bunch of nobodies and they go, and featuring WWE superstar, and all the tickets are sold and all the publicity is sold because WWE stars are showing up on this show. I guess that does good for Impact because it is their pay-per-view. It is their pay-per-view buys. But the problem is Kenny Omega's not going to be there forever. And we learn that when things get stale and you just have your product, it's, these high ratings aren't going to last forever. So Impact Wrestling needs to use this time not to just, get a few eyeballs in Impact Wrestling while they have Kenny Omega in their ring. And, they've got, Impact Wrestling or Tony Khan and Tony Schiavone running commercials on Impact Wrestling. They need to utilize this chance to show that they are trying to at least be equal. I'm not saying they are equal, but they trying to be a force in the wrestling world, because eventually Kenny Omega is going back to AEW, and Impact Wrestling, if they want to build off this at all, actually needs to show that they are legitimate.
I 100% agree. I will say this. I do agree with you. I mean, Swann needs to be involved in AEW. I will say this. Between both, I'm gonna kind of flip the script a little bit. Between NXT New Year's Evil and then New Year's Smash from AEW this week, I give the slight edge to AEW from the kind of the ooh, ah, wow, shock factor moment. But I will say from top to bottom, from a match perspective, NXT was the better show. And the ratings were so close this week. They were within 20,000. I believe AEW got a slight edge, slightly over 650, 660. And I believe NXT was about 640, give or take. So it was pretty close, and that's how close it was this week. I don't even want to talk Raw or SmackDown because those shows weren't even that good.
And it had Raw Legends Night this past week, featuring legends like Carlito, who was advertised but did not show up, and apparently did not even get an invite. And Candice Michelle, who was also advertised, the same for her, said they never even reached out to her for Legends Night. But you did have Tori Wilson, Mickie James, who apparently is now a legend. You had The Big Show, apparently also who is a legend. Hulk Hogan, Jimmy Hart. But probably the big thing at the end, which, again, this is me picking at straws. We're going to move over to Raw right now. This is picking at straws. Goldberg. His whole gimmick of he's here because Drew McIntyre's not showing respect. First off, you're thinking of Roman Reigns. If you want to do the whole heel versus face promo here, you can't go after Drew McIntyre. That made, to me as a wrestling fan, like, what are you talking about? Hasn't shown respect. Second off, if there's anybody out there who's not showing respect to people, it's Goldberg. He literally beat Bray Wyatt in a few seconds last year to take the belt off of him just to rob Bray Wyatt of a championship match at WrestleMania. Like, I don't come close to even understanding this whole Goldberg coming out to Drew McIntyre saying he doesn't show respect to the veterans. You can say that to Roman Reigns. That's a good gimmick. You got a good guy taking on a bad guy there. But Drew McIntyre, I mean, you're literally going up to the best guy in the company who literally shows respect and happiness to everyone he comes by. He literally was the one who said, trying to keep himself as a good guy, that he wasn't deserving of the breakout star of the year, that it was somebody like MVP who was deserving of breakout star, because he's not a heel, so he's not going to hype himself up. He's going to be, a little modest, a little humble. So the whole Goldberg angle, I get you wanted to come out and fight at Royal Rumble. I don't know why. I don't think it adds any more eyeballs to this. My question, I guess, to you about all this is Goldberg leaving with the belt of the Royal Rumble?
I sure as hell hope not. For the love of God, please do not put the belt on Goldberg. If WWE knows what's good for him, you shouldn't even brought him back to begin with. But you do not take the belt off arguably one of the hottest stars in all of wrestling at this point. Not even just WWE, all of wrestling. Drew McIntyre has been great in 2020. You just can't put the belt on Goldberg. It'd be a little ridiculous. I know a lot of people are not happy about it, and I agree with them 110%. The internet wrestling community is ripping this to shreds. I did see some stuff from MJF. Of course, MJF's always in heel mode, but he was shouting out, instead of Goldberg, he was shouting out Oldberg, as in, he's old, and he's also, It's old news. So we need to stop with the Goldberg stuff. And we were just talking about bringing new talent, not old talent. Let's bring new talent up from NXT and bring them up with new rivalries, because I want to see fresh blood. And this is why I don't really get invested in Raw or SmackDown anymore. It's just been, the product's just awful. I still watch, but it's like, who do you get invested into anymore? Because there's no new stars. I mean, Keith Lee's been decent. I'll give Keith Lee that. Drew McIntyre has been great. But overall, it's just from top to bottom, Raw and SmackDown are letdowns. And again, NXT and AEW are the shows to watch every single week. When you have a show kick off, which NXT New Year's Evil kicks off with Damian Priest and Karrion Kross, that's a main event match right there. And they start off the show with it. And then obviously you got Ripley and Gonzalez, like you said, tore the house down. And as I've already been on record of saying this before the year ended on our last show, that Raquel Gonzalez will be the breakout star of 2021. And she put on a great match with Rhea Ripley this past week. Fantastic match. And then also Balor O'Reilly. I mean, that was my pick when they faced off before as one of the better matches of the year anyways. So NXT from top to bottom is just way better than anything SmackDown or Raw are doing right now. In AEW, I would say they were doing a little bit too much WWE this past week. I mean, Snoop Dogg, is that a frog splash? I mean, what do we call that? I don't even know what that was. I love Snoop. I'm a big fan.
Doggy paddle.
I guess so. It's just, to me, as much as I respect and love what Snoop has done, I think he's a cool cat. Or poor choice of words there. A cool dog, so to speak. That frog splash was absolutely awful. But again, the shock factor moment, Bullet Club's back together, which is why I slightly tip my cap over to AEW.
I don't want you to get too excited. We had Snoop Dogg and AEW, but WWE could possibly best that. I know you heard the rumors and you are super excited because Angel Garza on Monday Night Raw with his Secret Admirer gimmick was looking for the one and only. She didn't know she was being looked for, but she was told on social media she's being looked for. And boy, like, what a wonderful person she is. Her first response is, WWE calls me? Sure, I'll go get a paycheck. And that is Cardi B. There are the rumors that she might show up at WrestleMania. Obviously, they mentioned her on Raw this past week, and I didn't know they were mentioning her. But like anybody who ruins anything, because I mean, I'm not a Cardi B fan. I think of all the people out there.
Is anybody a Cardi B fan, really? Come on.
I think she's one of the worst, and part of that reason is, and this has not much to do with her music, but it has to do with things like, oh, well, if they do call me, I'll go get that paycheck. Like, you can't even pretend to care. Like, people like The Rock, who are worth almost $1 billion, if you bring him into WWE, he's not going to literally put out, I guess I'll show up for that special appearance and get that paycheck. Free money's free money. Like, he wouldn't put something like that. He would actually act like he cared, like he was going for a reason of vengeance or revenge or, you know, to show up and give the fans what they wanted. Literally, that's what Cardi B put on Twitter, is that, I didn't know they were wanting me to come to WrestleMania, but because Wally put something out like, hey, Cardi B, go get it. Go to WrestleMania. They want you there, something like that. And she's like, I guess I'll go get that paycheck. Why not? Money's money. Like, please don't bring in Cardi B. Cardi B is the celebrity example of what you're doing with the wrestling talent in the fact that you're bringing out Goldberg. And I guess the one thing I've said before about people like Goldberg, and I'll say it again, I'm perfectly fine with Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, The Rock, any sort of people you want to bring out for Royal Rumble, for WrestleMania, for these big shows. I get it. You're trying to get eyeballs on it. And people like me, they want to see the wrestling and they want to see the celebrity. We want to see why WrestleMania is different than TLC. Newsflash out there to people, WrestleMania is not Wrestle Kingdom. WrestleMania is a show. I'm somebody who goes to WrestleMania every year when I'm allowed, and I will tell you I go because it is half wrestling, half show. So I do not want to go see the best. It's not so much I don't want to go see, but I know I'm not going to go see the best wrestling show out there. But what makes WrestleMania different than Tables, Ladders, and Chairs or Hell in a Cell or Night of Champions or any one of these events is that it brings out people that you're not going to see at Night of Champions. It brings out celebrities. It brings out the part-time wrestlers. It's Raw Legends Night mixed with some of the biggest matches of the year. That's why WrestleMania sucked last year. I could care less if the matches looked like Wrestle Kingdom, which they didn't, but WrestleMania sucked last year because it was missing essentially what NXT had this week and has had in a lot of their previous weeks on their show. If WrestleMania looked like New Year's Evil looked like this week did in the Performance Center, because you want to know what the Performance Center can look like in front of no fans, that's what it can look like. And if WrestleMania had at least that presentation, like we saw, I forget her name right now, but the new Asian wrestler who came out, the female wrestler who came out with that amazing entrance with the guy watching her as she wrestled, as she just won a squash match, but I mean, with the torches all around the ring, I mean, shows you that WrestleMania, if postponed for a few months and still took place at the Performance Center, could have been a hell of a lot better show just based off of what they've done recently in the post, I guess, current pandemic situation. But to stay on the WrestleMania topic, it is half part-timers, it is half good wrestling, and I'm fine with Goldberg. I like to see Goldberg. I like to see The Undertaker. I like to see all those kind of people. I don't want to see them in championship matches. Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar in a special attraction match is great. The reason why I loved The Rock and John Cena 1 is because nothing was on the line, and it meant anybody could win, and it meant anything could happen, because none of it has anything to do with the storyline, so nothing going forward matters. It's why I watch Wrestle Kingdom. I don't know the storylines going forward. I don't know if Jay White has recently signed a contract extension with New Japan or is planning on leaving WWE. I watch that championship match unbiased. And that's how I watched John Cena and The Rock at WrestleMania 28. Because it didn't matter if The Rock literally dropped dead the next day. It wasn't going to change the result of the match, which could go either way. It could go Rock, it could go John Cena. If that result flipped hands, it wouldn't have changed the storylines at all, because the storyline really didn't do anything from that going forward. So Goldberg and Brock Lesnar can fight for 5 seconds. They can fight for 5 minutes. They can fight for an hour. It'd be a great match. Because we get to see both their entrances. We get to see them wrestle again. We get the chance to go buy their T-shirt and sign their autographs at Access and have their name on big banners outside of football stadiums. And then after whoever wins or whoever loses, we can then move on to the current talent, the Seth Rollinses, the Roman Reigns, the Drew McIntyres, for the actual championship matches in which the storylines we are invested in and actually care where they came from and where they are going. Not just, well, Goldberg came back in January, won the belt, he drops it the next month at WrestleMania, goes back away to disappear again. That is what I don't want to see.
Yeah, I don't either. I definitely don't either. I just got to add one thing. Please do not bring Cardi B to WrestleMania. Just don't do it, WWE. For the love of God, just don't do it. That's all I got to say.
Well, they've done worse. I wouldn't be surprised. Mike, moving on, though, to WrestleMania, it seems to be rumored that the Royal Rumble will not have any fans in attendance. We were hoping out that maybe this would be the first one with fans back in some capacity, but people backstage are saying they plan on the Royal Rumble going ahead without any fans in attendance. Another one of the big four pay-per-views without any fans, which will mean that actually four big four pay-per-views in a row from WrestleMania all the way back to the Royal Rumble and no fans in attendance as we swing back around to WrestleMania 2 current pandemic situation. WrestleMania, the second one during the pandemic, because I have a feeling it won't be over in April. Question for you is, where do you see WrestleMania happening, with or without fans, from the Thunderdome? If you were to take a guess today, knowing that this probably will not be all cleared and gone by the beginning of April, what do you see happening for WrestleMania?
I see 50% fans. I see 50% capacity. I think we're turning a corner. I know we talked off the air about a few things, so I think we're turning a corner with this whole pandemic. I believe, I'd like to see it maybe March. I'd say mid-February is where we need to really see where things are at with this pandemic. But I believe if things are going in the direction that I think they are, I do think I don't know if we're gonna see 100%, but I'm saying somewhere between 25 and 50% of an audience at WrestleMania. So, my fingers are crossed. Hopefully, everything gets better across the board and we're out of this pandemic, or at least the pandemic's almost in that rearview mirror. So fingers are crossed, but again, 25 to 50,000 people, or I'm sorry, 25 to 50% capacity, where you can still have the socially distanced portion of it, and we all stay safe. That's what I'm hoping for.
Wrestle Kingdom had about 20,000 people in attendance. I feel they are much further along in the pandemic. Everyone still had to wear masks. They were not allowed to vocalize, which was something actually pretty new, even though they're all wearing masks. They were not allowed to vocalize any chants or do anything when it comes to using their mouths. They had to just clap and use thunder sticks and stuff like that. So you didn't hear a lot of booing or chanting either way. I feel America is a little bit different than that. They wear their mask and they're there. There won't be any sort of restrictions on booing or cheering. But here's what I see. I see in about a month or two them officially naming Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida, as the home for WrestleMania. Now, I feel them not announcing that there's going to be a crowd. I feel they're going to name that as the stadium, and I feel that regardless what happens, and regardless of when WrestleMania is, if they push it back a few weeks or what have you, because right now it is still scheduled for, I think, March 28th, that it will take place at Raymond James Stadium this year. It will take place with a traditional WrestleMania-style set. That is what my guess is. Now, as for fans, I don't have an answer for that, but I feel that WWE and WrestleMania are happening at Raymond James Stadium, and they're going to announce Raymond James Stadium, and they're going to announce tickets at a much later time. But regardless, I think what stinks about all this is what we can probably be pretty assured of is WrestleMania this time around will not be back to normal. It'll still be, at best, 50% audience. WrestleMania Access probably will not exist. WrestleMania Superstore might not exist. All the things that come with WrestleMania weekend that I love, the Ring of Honor shows, the New Japan shows, the Impact shows, the AEW shows, the other indie wrestling shows, the nightclub life, just all the party atmosphere that WrestleMania is, will not exist. But I will say this much. We can probably learn a lot from the Super Bowl, which is happening this year at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, to see exactly, and I bet you Vince McMahon will be watching a close eye on the NFL's festivities in Tampa to see not just what they're allowed to get away with, but what works. What fans comfortably do, how many fans are comfortably there, what kind of fan fest they still hold, what kind of other extracurricular activities still happen. So I have a feeling he's going to watch the Super Bowl, and we'll know about WrestleMania soon after. I think do we have to know about WrestleMania by Royal Rumble time? Because, I mean, they got to point at the sign, right? So they already got to have a sign ready. They got to have a logo ready. This is just so strange because by now I have my WrestleMania ticket, and here we are not even knowing where it is, what the logo is. Yeah, in 3 weeks, they're supposed to be pointing up at a logo to show us that they're going to WrestleMania, and I have no idea what that's even going to be.
One final thought on this. If you've noticed, and as you know, I'm a huge Cowboys fan. That's a whole different topic NFL-wise, but Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys organization and most sports organizations in Texas have done a pretty good job of getting some fans in the stands, primarily at Cowboy Stadium, at AT&T Stadium in Dallas in Arlington, Texas. They had, for the last game of the year, 30,000 people there. So if you're going to get a decent-sized crowd, why not just have it at Jerry's place? I'm not saying that's happening. I don't even know if there's any talks. But if Jerry Jones can get 30,000 people for a football game and do it right, why can't Vince McMahon get 20,000 in there for a wrestling event? We'll see. I'm curious how this is going to happen or how this is going to play out. We're going to be following it every step of the way, and hopefully as the weeks pass, we get better answers for our audience because at this point, we're just guessing. My guess, your guess, our audience's guess, we don't know. We'll just have to wait and see what happens.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Heel to Face podcast. We will hopefully get more information as we get closer and closer to the Royal Rumble. More participants named every single day, even a championship match. Goldberg and Roman Reigns, unfortunately, it looks like it's on the docket from the Thunderdome. What will the Royal Rumble look like? What will WrestleMania look like? Impact Wrestling's Hard to Kill pay-per-view right around the corner. AEW with a pay-per-view coming up in February as well. All this and much, much more. For Brandon Clements, for myself, Jared Wicks, we will talk to you next week on another edition of the Heel to the Face podcast.